Now for the Systems Alliance. Let me take a drink because I'm already yawning. And we just barely scratched the surface about this whole thing. I think we're only about halfway through. Should probably do the timeline here soon, but we'll do that in a little bit. Anyway, talking about N7, our classification in the Alliance military. The Alliance Military Vocational Code System classifies the career path of all serving personnel. The MVC consists of one letter and one number. A soldier's MVC indicates proficiency, not rank. So basically, even though I'm considered an N7, which is the highest distinction for a special ops unit, I don't outrank someone like, say, Captain Anderson, because he is a captain still, and I only made it to commander. So he still outranks me, but I am a highly proficient soldier in my own right. The letter notes career path. The number indicates level of experience, as indicated by service record, technical scores, and commendations. All 26 letters are used, and numbers run from 1 to 7. N is the letter code for Special Forces personnel. As I've said a few times, Vanessa is an N7, so she has the highest experience based on her service record, technical scores, and commendations of all of the N units. And so she's one of a few select soldiers who has been commended and put into the N7 program. Normally, if you get to N1, that's an accomplishment, so that kind of gives you an idea of how, I suppose, experienced Shepard has to be, how driven Shepard has to be in order to be all the way at the top of one of the most valued distinctions in the Alliance military. But now I'm just, what's the expression I'm looking for? I forget. I'm just making myself look better, basically. Probably should have looked at the timeline earlier, as well as the personal history summary, although we didn't have the timeline excuse me, when we were first starting out. But we'll look at it now. Just a little bit. So in 2069, Armstrong Outpost was the first permanent human settlement on Luna. On our moon, that is, and it was founded on the 100th anniversary of the first lunar landing. We'll skip ahead to 2103, and we've actually created a human settlement on Mars, in Lowell City in the Eos Chasma. These are all actual geographic locations on Mars that you can look up. Not Lowell City, because it's not there yet, but the Eos Chasma, you can look that up and see where that is on the surface of Mars. Skip ahead to 2137. The Eldfell Ashland Energy Corporation demonstrates helium-3 fuel extraction from the atmosphere of Saturn. And helium-3 is important because it is the fuel for all of our intergalactic ships. Helium-3 is an isotope, and it's not radioactive. I think it's just missing a neutron, if I remember from my chemistry classes. But it's not the common helium. It's the rarer form, I think, of it, if I remember correctly. But you can actually, according to Eldfell Ashland, you can extract it, and that allows you to run your ships more efficiently by extracting it from, I'm assuming, helium-4 in the atmosphere of planets like Saturn. Gas giants, mostly. In 2142, the construction of Gagarin Station, or Jump Zero. So now we're all the way out at Pluto. So that kind of gives you an idea of how far we've come. We were just on the moon in 2069, then it took us a long time to get to Mars with the first settlement. Now we're settling or creating a station all the way out past Pluto, which is quite a ways away. Probably pretty cold out that way too. In 2148, one of the most important discoveries in human history. Excuse me. Prospectors discovered the Prothean ruins at the Promethei Planum on Mars. I like how they did that 300 years after the supposed beginning of the gold rush too, in the western United States. A year later, they translate the Prothean data found at the ruins, and that leads humans to the Charon mass relay, which was out by Pluto. I forget if they tell us now or later. I don't think they tell us until later, but the Charon relay was actually frozen in an ice planet, a planetoid that was revolving around Pluto. So we found out about it, we unfroze that planetoid, and then we opened up the mass relay, And we sent an explorer party to try to investigate it, and it shot them light years away to Arcturus, which is the first star that we were able to find. And I don't honestly remember if they tell us that in this timeline or if that's just in the timelines in later games. But that's what happened. We found it. We melted that little icy rock that was revolving around Pluto, and it shot us light years away to Arcturus. So that's what ended up happening the first time we discovered intergalactic travel. In 2151, a shipping accident at Singapore International Spaceport exposes downwind communities to containers of dust form element 0. Dust form element 0 is important. Keep that in mind. We'll get to a Codex entry about why it's important in a little bit. The Alliance begins construction that same year of Arcturus Station, and like I said, that's out at Arcturus, the star that we were flung to when we went through the Charon relay for the first time. So now we are creating an outpost in that system. The next year, roughly 30% of the children born in Singapore, after their exposure to that dust, suffer from cancerous growths. Excuse me. Which is bad, which is very bad. The Systems Alliance begins settlement of Earth's first extrasolar colony world, the planet Demeter, which was probably close to Arcturus. I forget if we go there or close to there in this game or not, but maybe. A couple of years later, like I said before, on April 11th, 2154, Commander Vanessa Shepard, or who she currently is, Commander Vanessa Shepard, was born. Year after, the Systems Alliance occupies the completed portions of Arcturus Station as their headquarters, and they would continue to build on that until a few years later when they fully occupy it as their center of operations, basically. The next year, some children in Singapore start exhibiting minor telekinetic abilities, and this is the kind of stuff that was a fairy tale previously. It was the stuff of smoke and mirrors. Now they can actually lift objects off the ground or bend spoons at their will. Obviously, some people were freaking out about that. The year after that, the Turians encounter human explorers after we activated a relay that we weren't supposed to, and that led to the First Contact War, which we already read about or heard about. Occupation and liberation of the human colony of Shang-Chi happens that year, and then we take it back, I think, the same year. And then that leads to the settlement, the diplomatic settlement of human and Turian relations. The next year, humans begin to learn the potential of biotics by exploring what the humans that were born with telekinetic abilities can do. The telekinetic abilities are all grouped into a general concept known, like it says, as biotics. And the biotics are an effect of dust form element 0 exposure. So an international effort to track element 0 exposures begins, and roughly 10% of the exposed children will show some level of biotic abilities. So they can use telekinesis, or they can use other things that we'll get into when we get to the biotics entry, which is coming up pretty soon. In 2160, the Systems Alliance Parliament was formed, and that allows them to have their own government draw as an intergalactic body, based on their involvement in the First Contact War. 5 years later, the humans will establish an embassy on the Citadel, and that gives us some pull with the galactic environment, because without an embassy, we could go to the Citadel, but we really didn't have any support there. We didn't have our foot in the door until we got an embassy on the Citadel. Now that we do, we have some sort of political draw to our species, whereas other species had far more draw than we did before. Now we're a little more on level with the rest of the galaxy. In 2170, Batarian slavers attacked the Alliance colony of Mindwar. We were not there. We were still on Earth at that point, but it was a devastating moment in Alliance history, and they basically killed most of the able workers on the colony and kidnapped most of the women and children and forced them into slavery. It was not a proud moment in the Alliance's history, and some of them managed to escape, but very few made it out alive, or without permanent emotional scars. 6 years later, the Skillian Blitz, pirates and slavers, presumably from a similar area that the ones that attacked Mindwar were from, attacked Elysium, which is the human capital in the Skillian Verge, an area out close to the Terminus systems, if I remember correctly. But the pirates and slavers attack Elysium, presumably with the same intentions as what they had with Mindwar, but they are repelled by the Alliance this time because we aren't going to take what happened to Mindwar sitting down, and through a full counteroffensive, the Alliance comes to the aid of Elysium and kicks those pirates out. and saves the colony, which is great. It was much better than what happened with Mindwar, and we showed that we were ready if they were ever to do something to our colonies again. We would still have to mobilize, and there would still be a loss of life involved, so that would give them some reason to attack us, but we were more ready than we were with Mindwar. 2177, we were on a cruise. We know that happened. The Thresher Maws killed our entire unit and essentially ate the entire colony. And that was why their communications were cut, because there was no one to answer the communications because they were all eaten, presumably. So, another not very proud moment in Alliance history, although I don't think anybody could have really been prepared for something like that. Maybe the Krogan, but we'll get into them later. In 2178, in retaliation for the Skillian Blitz and probably for Mindwar as well, there is an Alliance fleet that actually went to the moon of Torfan, which I think is out in the Terminus systems, or very close to there, and they wiped out a huge army of slavers that presumably took a lot of prisoners. It was a bloody battle, and as far as I know, there were thousands of innocents killed in that battle. We were not there, but it is a bit of a stain, again, on the Alliance's history, because it went public that we did this, and there was outcry. There was public outrage for that sort of stuff. The Alliance handled it diplomatically, but it was still a big deal. And now we're in 2183, and Eden Prime has been attacked by the Geth, and now the Prothean beacon has given us a vision of death and destruction and war. And we don't know what it means yet, but we're going to find out later. And then we'll probably be able to add to that timeline. Back to the primary. I feel like I've been reading forever. So we have planets and locations, and then we have ships and vehicles is exclusive to this one for right now. Okay, so we'll do planets and locations over here, then we'll do ships and vehicles in the secondary, because there isn't one for primary for that yet. But we'll start with planets and locations.
The Terminus systems are located on the far side of the Attican Traverse, beyond the space administered by the Citadel Council or claimed by the Human Systems Alliance. It is populated by a loose affiliation of minor species, united only in their refusal to acknowledge the political authority of the Council or adhere to the Citadel conventions. Their independence comes at a price. The Terminus is fraught with conflict. War among the various species is common, as governments and dictators constantly rise and fall. The region is a haven for illegal activities, particularly piracy and the slave trade. At least once a year, a fleet from the Terminus invades the nearby Attican Traverse. These attacks are typically small raids against poorly defended colonies. The Council rarely retaliates, as sending patrols into the Terminus systems could unify the disparate species against their common foe, triggering a long and costly war.
So basically the point is, don't put your colonies out near the Terminus systems unless you're well prepared to defend them. I'm sure the Council will have something to say about that when we get to the Citadel, and about how Eden Prime wasn't prepared for this attack. Although, again, like I said, how anyone can predict that the Geth are going to attack your colony, I don't know. But they'll probably still have something to say about it. Because I know the Council not from experience, but from what I've heard from the captain and from other people who have been to the Citadel. And they're a little bit of, they're kind of hard asses a little bit, but yeah, we'll get into that a little later. Ships and vehicles. What do we got here? Sensors. Okay, so here we go. We're going to talk about the concept of... Are we going to talk about LADAR here, or is that in the technology? I think it's in technology. But anyway, here's how our sensors work on our ships. Light lag prevents sensing in real time at great distances. A ship firing its thrusters at the Charon relay can be easily detected from Earth, 5.75 light hours or 6 billion kilometers away. But Earth will only see the event 5 hours and 45 minutes after it occurs, because it takes light 5 hours and 45 minutes to get back to us because of how far away the Charon relay is from Earth. It's the similar concept of how people who have ever talked about how the sun could go out. If the sun ever, quote-unquote, went out, if it ever stopped burning in the sky, in space there, we actually wouldn't see it until 8 minutes after it happened from Earth, because it takes 8 minutes, roughly. I think it's a few seconds as well, It takes 8 minutes for sunlight to reach the planet Earth. So the light that we're seeing from the sun, we're seeing 8 minutes after it was produced, if that makes any sense. So that's a similar example to what they're talking about with the chain relay there. Due to the light speed limit, defenders can't see enemies coming until they have already arrived, because there's FTL travel and communications, but no FTL sensors. Frigates are crucial for scouting and picket duties, and FTL sensors would be really hard to use, as we'll see when we get to later. But that's for another Codex entry. Passive sensors are used for long-range detection, while active scanners obtain short-range, high-quality targeting data. Passive sensors include visual, thermographic, and radio detectors that watch and listen for objects in space. A powered ship emits a great deal of energy. The heat of the life support systems, the radiation given off by power plants and electrical equipment, or the exhaust of the thrusters, etc. Starships stand out plainly against the near absolute zero background of space, because you're not going to see that kind of light radiation or that energy radiation from a vacuum of space. So you'll know something is there if you see that kind of energy with your passive sensors. Passive sensors can be used during FTL travel, but incoming data is significantly distorted by the effects of the mass effect envelope and Doppler shift, because these passive systems can detect this energy, but the energy is the energy is distorted because the energy is detected probably through photons, which are given off by the energy, or heat, which is also given off by the energy. But both of those things are distorted when you're traveling faster than light, which makes them hard to pick up, even when you're traveling in FTL with the most advanced sensors. And that Doppler shift, it's the shift of light further towards... how is this explained? I think it was just on Jeopardy a couple of days ago, and I can't remember how they explained it, but basically it's the shift of light from one end of the visual spectrum to another, and it if there's data involved in the light, which there can be if you use LiDAR, it makes it hard to distinguish the message because the message is so caught up in the frequency. It gets hard to read at that point. I'm no expert on this. I'm not a quantum physicist. I took physics for engineering when I was still an engineering major, and that was quite a few years ago, so I don't know everything about this. So feel free to explain it better in the comments if you know more about it than I do, which is pretty likely. Anyway. Active sensors are radars and high-resolution LiDARs, which use lasers to detect and range things, or detect the range of things, that emit a ping of energy and listen for return signals. LiDARs have a narrower field of view than radar because they use lasers rather than infrared. I think that's how radar works. But LiDAR resolution allows images of detected objects to be assembled, so you get that high-resolution image they were talking about before. Active sensors are useless when a ship is moving into FTL speeds because the laser gets distorted and dispersed by the fact that you're traveling faster than light is allowed to travel. If you've ever seen that picture with the prism and the white light shooting through it and then turning into 6 colors, that's basically what happens to LiDAR when you use it in FTL travel. The light from the laser, even though it's highly concentrated, gets dispersed, and the messages that you receive from it just get completely dispersed. So we're not completely capable of doing incredible things yet with our technology here, but we're getting there. We're getting there at this point in time. So we will talk about technology next. Well, I won't. The narrator will. We'll see what he's talking about here. Probably biotics or somewhere in there. Yeah.
Biotics is the ability of rare individuals to manipulate dark energy and create mass effect fields through the use of electrical impulses from the brain. Intense training and surgically implanted amplifiers are necessary for a biotic to produce mass effect fields powerful enough for practical use. The relative strength of biotic abilities varies greatly among species and with each individual. There are 3 branches of biotics. Telekinesis uses mass-lowering fields to levitate or impel objects. Mass-raising kinetic fields are used to block or pin objects. Spatial distortion uses rapidly shifting mass fields to shred objects. Most organic species are capable of developing biotic abilities, though there are risks involved. Biotics are the result of an in utero exposure to element 0. This usually causes fatal cancers in the victim, but in rare cases, it coalesces into nodules within the fetus's developing nervous system.
So like I said previously when we were talking about the timeline, biotics come as the result of you being exposed to dust form element 0 when you are in utero, meaning you are not born yet, you're still in your mother's stomach, in her uterus, and you continue to develop as a fetus in utero with this biotic exposure, with this element 0 exposure involved in your system now. So then, usually, like they said when they were looking at it in Singapore, there were a large number of babies who had cancerous growths and just bad things all around happening to them. But a small amount of them developed nodules in their nervous system that they could then shoot electrical signals through, and that would allow them to manipulate dark energy, essentially, and allow them to create mass effect fields, which are the same thing that we've been using to travel at FTL speeds in a localized range and scale, on a localized scale. The only one I've really mentioned previously was telekinesis. Something like throw is considered telekinesis, and it pushes an object out of the way. There are other ones like barrier that's considered a kinetic field because it blocks bullets more effectively than your shields normally would. And then there's distortion. We don't actually have any spatial distortion abilities yet, but if you were to get something like warp or singularity, which you could get if you were an adept, if you started as an adept, that would be considered a spatial distortion technique. So it's essentially the black hole space magic of the game. You'll hear me use that phrase a lot because that's what it is. It's black hole space magic. But it keeps the universe going. You need to have something like that in this sort of a hard science fiction game. You need to have something that we can't fundamentally explain to run things, because if we could explain it, then wouldn't we be using it already in our own technology? You know what I mean? Like if we could explain how mass effect fields work in the present day, we would be able to use mass effect fields in the present day. We can't fundamentally explain them, so that's why we're not using them in the present day. Do you get my logic there, though? Like, that's important to remember here. It's laughable because it's black hole space magic, but it also keeps this universe going. And I can excuse it, of course, for that, because you need something like that to keep a universe like this going. Secondary technology, let's see. More on biotics in terms of biotic amps. They said that you needed amps implanted in your system in order to actually be able to use them effectively. So let's talk about them. Biotics manipulate mass effect fields using dozens of element 0 nodules within their nervous systems that react to electric stimuli from the brain, as they said in the biotics entry. Amplifiers allow biotics to synchronize the nodules so they can form fields large and strong enough for practical use. Amplifiers can improve a specific discipline or talent, and that's why when you look in the equipment screen, you'll see that there are different styles of biotic amp. We've only got the one that we came equipped with right now, but we'll get other ones later. An implant is a surgically embedded interface port into which amps are plugged in, quote unquote. On humans, the implant is usually placed at the base of the skull for convenient access, though the user must be careful to keep it free of contaminants, because if it gets contaminated, it messes up the electrical signals and all of that stuff, so they need to keep that washed regularly. Implant ports can fit a variety of amps, and there is a growing market for modifications and add-ons. The finest quality implants and amps are manufactured by Asari artisans, but the Alliance's L3 implants, first deployed in 2170, and what Vanessa is using right now, are a significant step forward. So the Asari are all really good with biotics. We will find out why that is later when we get more into the other races that are involved in the Citadel's, involved in galactic society. But for now, just remember the Asari are really good with biotics. Communications. And this is the one that got me because I didn't really fundamentally understand how this would work, how you would communicate with someone who's in a different solar system than you, based on how light travels normally. But they came up with an explanation for it. I still think it's a little silly, but we'll read it anyway. Real-time communication is possible thanks to networks of expensive mass relay comm buoys that can daisy-chain a transmission via lasers. It still doesn't make sense because lasers would be dispersed in FTL, but we'll keep going and then it'll explain it a little bit. Comm buoys are maintained in patterns built outward from each mass relay. The buoys are little more than a cluster of primitive miniature mass relays, so we use technology from the mass relays in order to develop these buoys. Each individual buoy is connected to a partner on another buoy in the network, forming a corridor of low-mass space. Tight beam communications lasers are piped through these tubes of FTL space, allowing virtually instantaneous communication to anywhere in the network. The networks connect across regions by communications lasers through the mass relays. With this system, the only communications delay is the light lag between the source or destination and the closest buoy. So long as all parties remain within half a light second or 150,000 kilometers of buoys, seamless real-time communications are possible. Since buoys are maintained in all traveled areas, most enjoy unlimited instant communication. Ships only suffer communications lag when operating off established deep space routes, around an uninhabited outer system gas giants because the signal gets distorted through gas, and other unsettled areas. During wartime, comm buoy networks are the first target of attack. Once the network is severed, it can take anywhere from weeks to years to get a message out of a contested system. In systems where a buoy network has not yet been built or has been destroyed, rapid communication means ferrying information through high-speed courier ships and unmanned data drones. And that's bad because you got to remember, as fast as these courier ships could be, it's not instantaneous like how the communications normally moves through these tight beam corridors. Because if you sever the communications buoy network, you're talking about days or weeks to get a message from a planet to a ship that's out on the other side of the solar system. Say, hey, we need help. By the time the ship gets there, it's more than likely that that colony is already destroyed. That planet has probably been decimated by whatever's attacking you. So you have to be really careful to defend the comm buoy networks. Although the fact that they mention here that they're the first target of attack and that they've been destroyed leads me to believe that this is an innovation that we created as a galactic society. Not humans, but the other galactic races created, rather than the Protheans. Or maybe the Protheans created it and we have their technology. Because if they've gotten destroyed before, we would have to know how to rebuild them, right? And if the Protheans made them and didn't leave us any means of rebuilding them, they would just continue to be destroyed, wouldn't they? But, yeah. Tubes of FTL space, so it's essentially like you're sending a laser through a vacuum of space, rather than shooting it off at FTL speeds through potential non-vacuums of space. Like these tight beams, these tubes, shoot off through parts of space where literally nothing is impeding the signal. So the lasers get shot through these little spaces, and they shoot to another buoy, and then it shoots to another buoy, and another, and another, and another, and it just chains all the way across to wherever you're sending the signal to. Again, I still think it's a little silly, because wouldn't the laser disperse while it's going through this vacuum? Or am I just thinking of that because it's, in normal FTL travel, the laser would disperse because you're potentially going through, nebulae or gaseous buildup or gas giants or any other planets. You're moving through them faster than the speed of light when you're normally traveling. So you're basically jumping over everything and the particles are going through whatever you're traveling through. But I'm assuming these tubes don't have anything to impede them. So they're set up in such a way that they will just go straight across a vacuum of space to another chain and then another chain and keep going. But that's how it works. It's a little convoluted, but like I said, it's not a bad thing. At least they attempted to explain it rather than just saying, it's not important. You don't need to worry about it. We do, because we need to know how these things work. So anyway, last but not least for primary, weapons, armor, and equipment.
Combat hard suits use a dual-layer system to protect the wearer. The inner layer consists of fabric armor with kinetic padding. Areas that don't need to be flexible, such as the chest or shins, are reinforced with sheets of lightweight, ablative ceramic. The outer layer consists of automatically generated kinetic barriers. Objects traveling above a certain speed will trigger the barrier's reflex system and be deflected, provided there is enough energy left in the shield's power cell. Armored hard suits are sealable to protect the wearer from extremes of temperature and atmosphere. Standard equipment includes an onboard mini-frame and a communications, navigation, and sensing suite. The mini-frame is designed to accept and display data from a weapon's smart targeting system to make it easier to locate and eliminate enemies.
So essentially the heads-up display that we see in all of the different missions are coming from our combat suit. We can see enemies with those red targeting icons there. We can see our health and all of those other sorts of things. We can see our mini-map as a result of our armor that we're wearing. So that's how that works. Presumably the barriers that they're talking about here, these kinetic barriers, are made the same way that kinetic barriers are made by biotics, and that's how they developed them, is based on how biotics work. But they distinguish between barriers and shields later in the game, or not later in the game, later in the series. So I'm not really sure why they do that. Maybe there's a Codex entry talking about why they distinguish them in Mass Effect 2 and 3, whereas in 1, kinetic barriers and shields, as we can see in the next entry, are basically interchangeable.
Kinetic barriers, more commonly called shields, provide protection against most mass accelerator weapons. Whether on a starship or a soldier's suit of armor, the basic principle remains the same. Kinetic barriers are repulsive mass effect fields, projected from tiny emitters. These shields safely deflect small objects traveling at rapid velocities. This affords protection from bullets and other dangerous projectiles, but still allows the user to sit down without knocking away their chair. The shielding afforded by kinetic barriers does not protect against extremes of temperature, toxins, or radiation.
How they distinguish between bullets and, other objects. It says when it deflects only objects traveling at rapid velocities. How a mass effect field distinguishes between that and, say, a stationary object, I don't know. You got me on that one. It's probably part of the technology, and that's the part we don't have to worry about, but it still confuses me. I have questions still, and I don't think they ever get answered why that is, but I'm sure there's an explanation that I'm overlooking. Again, if you guys have better explanations than what I'm going with in these Codex entries, feel free to let me know in the comments and let everybody else know in the comments, because, like I said, I'm not an expert at this game. I don't know everything about the source lore. It's going to be hard for me to explain everything when I don't know everything, So I'll come up with the best explanation I can, but if you feel like I didn't do an adequate job explaining it, please feel free, correct me. I'm open for criticisms and corrections if you feel that you need to do that. Perfectly fine by me. And last one, Metagel.
Metagel is a common medicinal salve used by paramedics, EMTs, and military personnel. It combines several useful applications: a local anesthetic, disinfectant, and clotting agent all in one. Once applied, the gel is designed to grip tight to flesh until subjected to a frequency of ultrasound. It is sealable against liquids, most notably blood, as well as contaminants and gases. The gel is a genetically engineered bioplasm created by the CERTA Foundation, a medical technology megacorp based on Earth. Technically, Metagel violates Council laws against genetic engineering, but to date, it has proved far too useful to ban.
So in a way, this gives us some sort of pull with the galaxy, in spite of the fact that we didn't have our own embassy until, 2165? We created Metagel, which is essentially the most useful medicinal element that has ever been created in the galaxy that we have knowledge of. And like they said, it's considered genetic engineering because of all of the different things that it does and what it seals against and all those things. But it's so useful that the council can't really say, hey, we can't use that, because it has made any fighting that has happened since humans have shown it to the galaxy so much easier, because you literally hit a button on your Omni tool, and then your combat suit disperses an anesthetic, and what else did it say? A clotting agent and a disinfectant to the wound that you just got from a bullet. Like, that's crazy. That's crazy how useful that is, So we had some pull with the system, even if we didn't have an embassy, because of Metagel. So good job, CERTA. You guys are doing good work over there, even if you are a megacorp, and therefore some people probably hate you for it. But good work, keeping us alive. Anyway, last one for secondary weapons, armor, and equipment again, and we're just talking about upgrades. I got this from getting the first upgrade kit on Eden Prime. You could have gotten it from any other upgrade kit if it was the first one that you picked up, but I got it from the one that I waded through that sludge to get to, that algae-infested pond. The development of practical manufacturing Omni-tools. The Omni-tool that I was using was the little thing on my left arm that glowed yellow when I used Metagel in the previous, on the Eden Prime mission, or when I used Sabotage. That was my Omni-tool. Allows modern militaries a great deal of flexibility in equipment loadouts. A vast number of field modification kits, or upgrades, are available for common equipment such as weapons, armor, Omni-tools, biotic amps, and even grenades. I actually don't think they give us upgrades for Omni-tools or biotic amps in this game, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Maybe I just didn't get a good enough one that had an upgrade slot in it, I don't know. An upgrade kit typically consists of less than a dozen unique parts and an optical storage disk. When loaded into an Omni-tool, the OSD provides all technical specifications required to manufacture the tools and additional parts necessary to install the upgrade onto another piece of equipment. Assembly is typically modular, and installation can be completed in less than a minute. So if you see me swapping out upgrades in the middle of a mission, it's because it takes such a short period of time that it becomes redundant to say, well, I can't switch them because it'll take us a minute and we might need them. A minute usually isn't that much time to ask. Now, if we're, in a combat situation, that's a different story. I probably won't be switching upgrades in the middle of an intense firefight, but when we're, taking it easy in between fights, you can afford to do something like this. So that's probably how I'll do that. Probably the same thing for weapons, too. But not armor, because armor you have to change out of and then put a new one on, and that just doesn't make sense when you're planet side. How do you take off a combat suit if you have toxic gases in the atmosphere of a planet, Doesn't make sense. Since Omni-tools are designed to use common battlefield salvage materials such as plastics, ceramics, and light metals rendered into semi-molten Omni-gel for quick use, and that's why we melted it down before, it is quite possible for a trained soldier carrying upgrade kits to customize gear on the battlefield to fit the current tactical situation. If they do it beforehand. Like I said, it doesn't make much sense in an intense firefight, but it's very useful. Upgrades are really useful, and they will come in very handy when we continue with the game. Speaking of which, hey look, the Codex is no longer blinking at me. Yay, it's all done. Awesome. Also, the heads-up display that they were talking about includes our map. So if you ever see me consult the map while I'm out on the field as Vanessa, like role-playing, the reason why I'm doing that within the roleplay, and it makes sense, is because our heads-up display would have this information available to us. Presumably, it would come up on our Omni-tool because I'm accessing it here, and I don't have my bodysuit on, so it's probably just on my Omni-tool. But that is going to do it for the Codex entries. I hope you guys don't mind that I'm doing the Codex entries this way. That was my shield regenerating after I equipped Scorpion there. About, 45 minutes ago at this point. But I hope you guys don't mind that I'm doing it this way. It's just more convenient for me if I put them all into one episode. And the crew stuff, I'm already on the ship. I might as well, do that stuff with the crew as well while I'm on the ship and looking at this stuff. So hopefully this wasn't too big of a deal in terms of how everything was structured. And we'll be doing it like this probably for the rest of the playthrough. But what will the council say about our just complete and absolute failure on Eden Prime with the beacon destroyed, and our only evidence that one of their best agents, being a traitor, is a vision? Sorry, that's the best cliffhanger I can come up with because, I don't know. We know what they're going to say already. But we'll have to confirm that on the next episode of Mass Effect, where we'll actually be getting into gameplay again. So, sorry if you were expecting gameplay today. I just wanted to get these Codex entries out of the way. There will be a few times when this happens, but I'll try to keep it fresh and keep the gameplay going as well. I'll try not to do this too often. So thanks for watching, everybody, and I will see you next time.